Welcome to the exploration of consciousness.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the exploration of consciousness. I'm your host, Matt Presti. Great to be back with you all again. And today's guest, I'm welcoming Etienne de la Boetie² to the show. He is the author of Government, the Biggest Scam in History. And I'm honored to join him. We actually initially met at CauseFest in Franklin, Tennessee. The great Courtney Turner in Houston were the producers of that event, and it was a pleasure to meet him. So welcome to the show, Etienne. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, and it's good to see you, and I've been looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, why don't you, for the audience, just give an introduction of yourself? I know you're also are you the founder and director of artofliberty.org?
The Art of Liberty Foundation is my organization. We're a startup voluntarist public policy organization, and so the goal
Okay.
is to grow something similar to a Heritage or a Brookings or a Cato, but from a
Mm,
principled voluntarist perspective. For those in your audience that aren't familiar with voluntarism, it's the idea that all relations between human beings must be voluntary. No one gets to use violence or extortion on anybody else. No one gets an exception for morality, not even government. And so, if everything has to be voluntary and nobody has an exception for morality and nobody, uh, gets to use extortion, then you can't really have a government. And so there's a little bit in voluntarism. There's an understanding that everything the government does would be done better, faster, cheaper by the free market, by mutual aid societies, by nonprofits, by co ops, by homeowners associations, by armed protective service companies, by insurance company provided fire brigades, because insurance companies aren't going to insure your house if you don't have a fire truck, etc. And so the market can provide everything that governments do, and that government is inherently illegitimate on its face. And so my book is Government, the Biggest Scam in History Exposed. And the subtitle is How Intergenerational Organized Crime Runs the Government, the Media, and Academia. And in the book, I make the case that government is best thought of as a technique to rob and control societies, and they've been getting away with it because they've been controlling the information that society receives on the legitimacy of government, on the desirability of government, on the necessity of having government through either the mandatory government school system, where everybody is kind of indoctrinated into this belief system before they're old enough to really evaluate the morality and the logic of the claims, or through a monopolized media system going back over 100 years, to where they're controlling the information that you receive about government, making it seem, all the movies and the television shows and the news programs, making it seem like it's legitimate, that it's in your interest, that the people in Washington D.C. aren't out for themselves, but they're just out to look after you and as civil servants. And so that's kind of like the basics of who I am and what I do.
great, great, excellent. Your exploration of consciousness, I just have to ask, what have you learned about yourself that is the greatest lesson for you? And perhaps that might even lead into
Karma,
karma. I was going to say that might even
karma.
lead into how you got into this whole thing. You want to just talk a bit to that? How did you come to
Yeah,
write
yeah.
this book? And
So on the consciousness side, it really was an understanding that we're all one. It's a group. There's no way to get away with anything in the universe. There's no way to use violence or aggression on people and not have that come back to you. and that that the system really runs counter to karma and to the golden rule and to natural law, because when you're advocating for a Republican politician or a Democratic politician, you're essentially advocating violence on your friends, your neighbors, your colleagues. And and to a degree, I believe that the system that we live under is a kind of karma for participating in a system that is essentially, advocating violence. So, if you think about what the Republicans, claim, or the Democrats claim, they say, "Hey, elect my guy. He's going to rob everybody, and he's going to put these policies into practice." The Democrats say, "No, no, elect my guy. He's going to rob everybody, and he's going to put these policies into practice." And voluntarists are, I describe it as the only ism that is fair for everybody. Nobody gets the ring of power because there is no ring of power, and there's this understanding that the world's a self-organizing system that produces spontaneous order, and that everything would be provided, and that's moral, and that's logical, and that makes sense, and you're not advocating any, you're not, voting violence on your neighbors. And so that was I don't want to say, I don't know if if they came simultaneously, but that was, kind of the biggest lesson for me in life, is that karma is always operating at maximum power in the universe. And then, I chose to write the book because I was divorced, and my kids were in the my ex had my kids in the mandatory government system. And I watched the government system running game on them using kind of unethically manipulative techniques that I cover in Government, the Biggest Scam in History. But there's a hidden curriculum in the school system. Part of that hidden curriculum is indoctrinating the kids into a pseudo religion called statism, which is the indoctrinated belief in the desirability, the legitimacy, and the necessity of having a government in the first place. But there's also an obedience component. There's a hidden obedience component in the government school system, and there's a debilitation component in the government school system. And so I'm watching the system use techniques like collective punishment, and public shaming, and some other things that were just driving, red, yellow, green troublemaker boards, and it just drove me crazy. So I really wrote the book for my kids, and to show them how the system works. And then I realized that, it was so important that I decided to write it for everybody else's kids. Now a lot of people actually use my book as a curriculum for homeschooling, and to explain to their kids, how what the kind of secret curriculum and these unethically manipulative techniques that, not just being used in the schools, but in Cub Scouts, Weeblos, Boy Scouts, Explorers, JROTC, ROTC, and police and military training. They're running game on the population by controlling the information that they receive. And so I want to be the guy that widely exposes it, not just in the United States, but in the world. So that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, it strikes some tones of familiarity. I just had a few months back John Kleisick, author of School World Order, on to talk about that. And his book's fantastic. The work he's done, of course, meeting the great Charlotte Thompson Iserby. And of course, that dovetails into John Gatto's work as well. I was going to ask you about that in particular, but yeah, we live under a Skinnerian kind of model of, Pavlovian conditioning and
Yeah.
these Skinnerian algorithmic kind of functions that seem to be becoming the new norm in terms of manageability, especially with what you see in China with the social credit scores. And it seems everything that is terrible is tested overseas and then eventually brought back to the United States, which gives me hope that we're still one last bastion of freedom that can really turn this around. And I know you talk about solutions a lot, and from your perspective, we'll get into that in the upcoming segments here. But you spoke of scouts, and that's one of the things that I'm a volunteer firefighter, and the very word volunteer, we like to say we're volunteer, not voluntold. So it's
Yeah,
just
yeah.
being part of a community thing is there's no coercion to do it, but it does
And that's honorable, right? And
right.
that's honorable. And like, so I thank you, for your service. And I've been in many communities where there's, where the entire, fire department is a are
Sure.
volunteers. And so, you can have everything you want from government without the theft and the extortion and the coercion, but most people have never thought about it, and it's being purposefully hid from the population through this monopolized media and the algorithmic censorship of some of these ideas on the DARPA internet. And so thank you for your service.
Oh, thank you, sir. Yeah, so that interesting point prior to getting into the scout discussion, you did mention too how a lot of things are charitable, and if you go back to prior to the mid 50s, around that time, many of the charitable organizations were done by churches, more on a local level. And then it
Yeah.
seems that when we got into this civil rights era and the government and the welfare system began to really take off, that it disincentivized millions and millions. As far as raising money at a local level, how do you guys look at that from a voluntarism perspective?
So I think the first thing is, we've got an organized crime system that's sitting on top of the population, and they want to have people dependent on the system.
Mm.
So they're pretending to be a human rights organization, and they're spending some money on chicken feed programs. They're trying to get people kind of addicted to the government, dependent on the government, and they're waging a kind of economic warfare against the population, keeping them artificially poor through confiscatory taxation, but
Hmm.
mostly through the theft of the value of your money through inflation by allowing the banks to engage in something called fractional reserve banking, where the banks, when you go to a bank to get a car loan or a mortgage, they're not loaning you depositor money. They just tickle the ivories. They credit your account with dollars they created out of thin air, and you spend the rest of your life paying off that mortgage. But what they don't tell you is that process is inherently inflationary, and it's stealing the value out of your money the same way that is if they just stuck their hand in their pocket and stole it. But they're just doing it in a kind of sneaky way that most people don't understand, and that the mandatory government school system isn't going to explain it to you. And the ripoff colleges, the government's ripoff colleges and universities aren't going to explain it to you. And so, if it wasn't for people being artificially poor, and if it wasn't for this crooked monetary system, the dollar in your pocket should be buying more and more every single year as productivity improvements and as innovations reduce the costs of either producing or distributing the luxuries and the necessities of life. But there, instead of you getting richer every single year and being able to afford more charity and being able to afford better education for your kids and being able to afford a nicer car and being able to afford, whatever it is that you want to buy, instead of that happening, they're stealing a value, keeping the population artificially poor. So people look around and they go, well, if it wasn't for the government, nobody would be making it. Look at, and so that's one of the things I'm exposing in the book, is that there is, that if it wasn't for this crooked monetary system, then we would have more than enough, wine, bread, and cheese at the table for everybody.
Hmm.
And your specific point, when you're spending money locally yourself, okay, or your church is spending it, or you're saying, hey, I'm going to get together with my church and we're going to do charity ourselves. Well, that aid is going to be way more directed. It's going to be way more effective. It's going to go exactly where it needs to go because you're spending your own money. There's not a crooked middleman in Washington, D.C., or Sacramento or Albany or somebody, someplace like that spending your money. You're watching every nickel, so you're going to get better outcomes. And that's one of the many, what I call market mechanisms that a lot of people, unless they've studied economics, don't understand, that there is an invisible hand in the economy. And when you're trying to satisfy customers, whether you're a brewer, a baker, or whatever you do in life, the fact that you're out for yourself, you're going to produce goods for the people around you. That's the
Mm-hmm.
reason why New York City has bread at 5:30 in the morning. That's why you can get a croissants and juice, and it's not from their generosity, it's from their self-love, but it produces this community benefit of providing you with orange juice and croissants in the middle of a city.
Right, right. It's well said. Like they like to say that you're taxed three times, right? Taxed on your work, taxed on what you buy, and then taxed on what you've bought.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's like an endless tax that just never amounts to real, true self-sufficiency. As for churches, I've noticed I'm not a religious man myself, more on a spiritual understanding of creator and creation, personalized. But people know that from my work with Walter and Leo Russell and the University of Science and Philosophy. But one of the questions or one of the observations I've made is with the local churches, and I live in Salem, Missouri, which is the heart of the Bible Belt, you could say, that runs, right through the Midwest, is that so many of their drives that I've seen them have when they collect money in front of places or they take up collections, at public areas or facilities, is that they're giving to these national organizations like the American Cancer Association.
Yeah.
And there was recently, well, just several years back, somebody within one of these churches who is a friend, they said, they went to their pastor and they said, why don't we start collecting all this money and pooling it together in our own church and then helping our members directly instead of giving it to like a Red Cross or an American Cancer a Society or whatever, which 80% of it goes, and up goes to the running of it, to the higher ups, the VPs and the president and all this stuff, where we could give it directly to our members and make it more of a hands-on. And so one of the churches around here I know did adopt that, and I think that's a great way of countering the idea that because it's national, like a Red Cross or international organization, and I did run sound for the Red Cross back in 2012. I think they rented the entire St. Louis Zoo, and their budget for the rental over 2 days was $2.5 million. And so I saw the waste firsthand. Anheuser-Busch beer everywhere, wine everywhere, big parties, all for the higher ups, and so just that kind of knowledge that people may or may not have about these organizations. If you can talk to your local pastor, if you can donate it to your local fire department, who's all volunteer, you're going to get a bigger return on that kind of an investment.
The favorite giving that I do is, I believe, nothing happens, by accident in the world. Everything happens for a reason. And so anytime that I, like the universe puts me in front of someone that is in need, like whether if I pull up in my car and the guy's like right there next to me, boom, like the universe wants me to help this guy, or boom, so that direct to the person in need is what I feel is like the absolute best giving that you can do. And the way the universe is telling you is when you're put in that situation, like, and it's right in front of you, you're expected to help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of people have an issue with that. They'll see a guy and they ask for money on the side of the road. If you're uncomfortable, buy a bag of apples, hand the guy a couple of apples. You might not feel so bad about, are you getting swindled? Are they just going to go buy alcohol or drugs with it? Hand them a, if you got some snacks, a bag of beef jerky, carry that around in your car and just hand that out because you're still giving in some way. But, those are different modalities of doing things that can still assist in such a charitable outreach. But All right, brother. Well, Flag Scouts, Youth, and Sports. I must say to my own listeners that I was an Explorer Scout. I got into scouting at around the age of 16. I was invited to play some floor hockey with the guys, and of course, that was a very beneficial time of my life. It really wasn't. I did read your section in the book on that about how regimented it was, as you know, once you realize later after having gotten out of it, how intense that regimentation can be and was, especially in the main Scout, Cub Scouts organization. I guess the question would be, for my experience, it was very loose, but I did learn quite a lot of good skills. I learned a lot about survival, got to do things that I wouldn't have normally gotten to do, like go sailing and things a kid of my stature when I was growing up didn't have the money to do. But because of an organization like that, I was benefited from it. And I know Dan Beard was the original founder of the Cub Scouts in America, which was a Rudyard Kipling copy of his organization in Great Britain. So basically, Dan Beard was inspired by what was called the Twilight Club, which is an organization of intellectuals, several notables being Mark Twain, Walt Whitman, Edwin Markham, and multiple other poets and thinkers. And they wanted to basically build a character movement to build character in man, because it developed out of Herbert Spencer's vision that, and it was basically his brainchild. And I know Spencer has these, very Darwinian views back in the late 19th century, but so did many of the intellectuals of that day. So I'm not really faulting him if you understand nuance and context. But the basic purpose of the Twilight Club was Spencer's vision that he saw man was in danger of becoming a cog in the wheels of industry. And so the poets gathered too, and they were like, we need to remind man of why he needs to remember that he has a soul. And so we should focus on character building. And that was Dan Beard's inspiration for creating the Cub Scouts. So I don't think it started out as let's indoctrinate everybody to believe and serve and worship the government and the flag. But obviously now we look at it today, and it's night and day, as a lot of things do change over time. They sort of take the opposite role after 50, 60 years, as is a rule in nature. All things change. But you just want to talk about your experience of the Cub Scouts and coming through that process. And do you think it has any redeeming qualities? Do you think that it could be reformed?
So before we get into that, I want to take it back just kind of like one step and talk about kind of the religion of statism and how it's being indoctrinated in the schools. And then we'll talk about then we'll talk about how it's indoctrinated in the Scouts and in the Explorers. But so the first of all, the starting point is that we are all born free, but everywhere we are in chains. But freedom is man's natural situation. And so get people to accept a ruling class, to get people to accept having a ruler, to get people to accept having their money stolen through taxation, you've got to indoctrinate them into a belief system that is essentially against their interest. And so part of that is through the mandatory government school system. And so they're going to teach you that government is legitimate, desirable, and necessary before you're old enough to really evaluate that. But even more kind of insidious is that they're slipping it to the population as a religion, but they're not calling it a religion. It has all of the hallmarks of an unethically manipulative religion or a cult. So it's kind of classic textbook, right out of the textbook, cult indoctrination techniques. But because they're doing it to you when you're young, you don't really realize it's going on because you can't recognize it. You haven't learned anything about behavioral psychology. But if we really unpack it, the government is making itself God. The president is the Pope. Children are forced to go to the church school where the teacher, the priest, is going to teach them about the holy documents of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. She's going to lead them in the common prayer of the Pledge of Allegiance. They're going to learn the hymns of the national anthem and the Star Spangled Banner. In middle school, they're going to be taken to Mecca, Washington, D.C., where they go into the Capitol that looks like the Vatican for a reason, where everything is oversized and you feel small and insignificant. The judges are going to wear vestments. They're going to sit on high. They're going to take kids on these field trips to Mecca. They're going to take them, into the temples, and they're going to show them the deities of Jefferson and Lincoln, and it's going to be very hushed, and it's going to be very reverent, and they're going to be kind of indoctrinated into this belief system that allows them to be tax farmed and controlled. And so that indoctrination is then kind of reinforced through this monopoly media system that is in bed with the Department of Defense and the intelligence agencies. And in my book, I break down the evidence for thousands of movies, thousands of TV shows. Many people don't realize how much
It's
what they
it's
see
enormous.
yeah.
Yeah.
There's a documentary called Theaters of War that that really breaks it all down. I highly recommend Theaters of War. If you didn't understand that this was going on, once you understand that it's going on, then you can't not see it. So like once you see it, you can't not see it. So now if you go back and once you understand it, the government is always the hero, whether it's Tom Cruise and Top Gun, whether it's
Right.
it's the president of the United States saving the world from invading aliens and Independence Day. The
Special
government
Agent
is the hero.
Ryan.
Special Agent
Yep.
Ryan, Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible, like the CIA and the FBI are always saving the day, and the FBI agents, they're always hot. Hot women in tight pantsuits, and everybody's good looking, and everybody's like clean cut, and they're making it look real good, and it's all lies. It's all a manufactured reality, to the point of the documentary Theaters of War really covers the fact that the Pentagon and the intelligence agencies, when they're providing this funding and they're providing this military equipment and they're providing bases and extras and everything like that, they have 100% script control. And it breaks down how that because they actually have scripts where you can see what the government either excised or rewrote.
Yep.
They're rewriting history so that people don't really understand. They've got a warm and fuzzy for the American military. They've got a warm and fuzzy for the flag, and they don't realize that they're having game run on them. They're getting chumped. They're getting lied to, and the government and the media and Hollywood, they're using unethically manipulative techniques like product placing the flag at moments of high positive emotion. And so some of the examples that I like to get, if you've ever seen, Matt Damon in the movie The Martian, finally gets off of Mars, the whole movie
Yep.
builds to this moment, high positive emotion when he gets off Mars, and then boom, they cut to Earth and everybody's waving American
Right.
flags, and then they mission control and there's giant American flags on the screen, and that's a technique called anchoring that's used.
Right.
That's why Coca-Cola will license a popular song so that when you're that song you like, oh yeah, I love this song, and you start associating it with Coca-Cola because they're playing the song while they're showing you the drink of Coca-Cola and the logo of the Coca-Cola and everything like that. So the government is using these same unethically manipulative techniques, but most people, they never notice it until it kind of gets pointed out, and then you realize, oh my God, they've been doing that my entire life, and that's why I have a warm and fuzzy feeling for the government.
Right.
And so that's I wanted to kind of set the table with that kind of understanding. Oh, so some of the other examples are like Rocky. When Rocky finally wins, he covers himself in the American flag and he's wearing American thing.
And he fights Russia.
Flying around. Yeah, fights Russia.
Right.
Superman is flying around the world, with a giant American flag, and so like they're playing game on you.
Right.
They're chumps. they're chumping you to a degree. So that sets the stage to talk about the Cub Scouts, the Webelos, the Boy Scouts, um, and in some of these other techniques. And so the government school system is this first kind of layer of indoctrination, but they need armed gunmen. So the government has a need for armed gunmen that are willing to use violence on peaceful people to, enforce the edicts of politicians, okay, or rob their neighbors, raise revenue on their neighbors, either the police raising revenue, the IRS, or whatever. So they need armed gunmen. And so there's another program, and however scouting developed in the beginning, I wasn't there. I don't know his true intentions. I don't know if it got switched. What I do know is that Baden Powell, who ran the Boy Scouts, was an authoritarian and a monarchist, and essentially the scouting has a roots in military, and I kind of break it down kind of in the book. But Baden Powell famously said, a scout is loyal to the king and to his subordinates.
Hmm.
He must stick with them through thick and thin against anyone who is their enemy or who even talks badly of them.
Right.
He said a scout obeys orders without question. Even if he gets an order he does not like, he must do as soldiers and sailors do. He must carry it out all the same because it is his duty.
Hmm.
So so scouting is again running unethically manipulative techniques on the kids. To your point, I look at scouting a little bit like rat poison. Okay, 99% of rat poison is good food.
Edible.
Otherwise, the rat consume it. Yeah. Otherwise, the rats wouldn't consume it, right?
Right.
So
Right.
99% of scouting is good food. Otherwise, the kids wouldn't go. And so what you're really getting in the background with scouting is that you're getting indoctrinated into this belief system that is against your interests, and they're running these unethically manipulative techniques on you. So they're giving you Cub Scout adventure loops and Boy Scout merit badges once you read the book Citizenship in the Nation or Citizenship in the World, and you learn your duties to the government and everything like that. And after you read that and you do the little test and everything, then they give you a cookie. Okay. And so that's kind of the poison is adopting that statism. They're going to do flag worship ceremonies.
Right.
They're going to put you into the uniform, the single form. So uniform is the single form. It's kind of a enforced, conformity where you're compacted into the group think of scouting, and you begin doing the saluting, and you begin doing the flag worship ceremonies, and you begin, and you take pride. They're going to develop pride in uniform in you. They're going to begin indoctrinating you into hierarchical command and control, where you begin, learning from a very young age that you're expected to defer to those that have a higher rank than you,
Hmm.
and that's natural and logical and everything. And to by the time that you get to the explorers, now they're going to begin and taking the kids, indoctrinating into the police, indoctrinating them into the military, taking them to military bases or to police stations. They're going to now we're going to start with the head shaving. So it's an indoctrinated religion, and so it's a shave-headed cult, the same way that the Hare Krishnas are a shave-headed
Hmm.
cult. It's a indoctrinated belief system to where everybody is expected to be the same and do the same things and have the same allegiances and have the same of everything. They're going to split you away from your friends and your family, and you're going to begin training at the military base, and they're going to give you guns, and then it gets kind of creepy, right? And so that is the hidden curriculum of scouting, but they're going to make it fun. You're going to go camping, and you're going to go hiking, and you're going to get
Hmm.
outside. And the Hitler Youth did the exact same thing. And I break that all down in the book. And one more thing, and one of the reasons that you can kind of take it and understand kind of who's in behind it is who's paying for it.
Hmm.
Okay, So when you take a look at who's paying for it, and I'm just going to read, again from the book. In the U.S., the Boy Scouts of America has been funded in recent years by the banks, cartel companies, and defense contractors dependent on fractional reserve banking, government monopolies, mandatory vaccines, and government contracts, including the banks, J.P. Morgan, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, U.S. Bank, cartel companies, Verizon, who's a warrantless wiretapper, Monsanto, who makes chemical weapons for the
Mm-hmm.
military and puts toxins in the food supply, vaccine makers, Abbott, Merck, Pfizer, Eli Lilly, who had created the mercury-laced vaccine preservative thimerosal,
Mm-hmm.
defense contractors, General Electric, who owns NBC, Dow Chemical, Lockheed Martin, and every single one of the companies that I just listed has been convicted of a felony or has paid criminal penalties for wrongdoing.
Right.
And so, who is paying for scouting? It's the people that are benefiting from the government system,
Mm-hmm.
from whether it's mandatory vaccines or whether it's spending on unneeded weapon systems for foreign wars based on lies and manufactured intelligence. That's who's paying for the scout. That's who's
Mm-hmm.
paying for the scouting.
Yeah, that's really interesting stuff. Of course, my point to Dan Beard, and I think you addressed the question very well, is that the road to hell is always paved with good intentions, right? You could look at Adolph Oakes, who started the New York Times, and look at the New York Times today. It's one
Yeah, yeah.
massive propaganda rag, but there actually
Mhm.
was ethical reasons for the formation of a lot of these organizations. But yet, it'd be an interesting study for someone to say this is what its original connotation was, and this is how it's different 100 years later, and then list all the steps as to how that changed. Because I don't think we had massive corporate funding of anything back in the change of the 20th century, So, but it was interesting nonetheless to note that at the very beginning of this industrial revolution that began in earnest around 1850, that the concern from these great poets was that, my God, if we don't instill a sense of ethics into man, he's going to lose himself and become a gear in this machine called industry. And so a lot of
I
people,
agree. I agree with that. Yeah,
yeah,
I
a
agree with that completely.
lot of people will say that the industrial revolution itself was the third turning, and so now we're in the fourth, or the great reset. You could say, Klaus Schwab, the fourth industrial revolution is now this fourth turning, or whatever they like to term it. But yeah, an interesting note that how things can actually become their opposite, even though the well-intentioned. But I like to quote Terence McKenna: "The road to hell may be paved with good intention, but it is never paved with clarity." And so
Yeah.
we really have to get clear, guys, on what is going down here and how things change over time. I know a lot of people around me, and you could say this for probably a lot of rural areas, have been Democrat their whole lives, their families, their grandfathers, their great grandfathers, and now they're looking at their own party and they don't even recognize it. So that's just an example of how, and even Spencer wrote about it, the man versus the state, about how the two parties, the conservatives and the liberals, basically, forgive me if I don't list the name exactly, the Tories or whatever and whatever, but each of them adopted and changed over a 50 to 80 year period each other's own stances against various things. They each became the other
Yeah.
in some kind of cyclical fashion. So that would make for an interesting study about how that happens. So
Well, because I want to tell you, because you brought up a really important point, and I want to just unpack it a
sure.
little bit more before we move on.
Hmm.
And so, if you're stealing trillions of dollars, okay, if you've engineered a system to steal trillions of dollars, okay, and you've got kind of like unlimited funds to work with, all right, just imagine that you're at a roulette table, okay, and instead of it being, having numbers of like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 that you can place your bet on or whatever. Imagine if instead of those numbers, it was control of the media, control of scouting,
Hmm.
control of the churches, control of newspapers, control of the Cub Scouts, whatever that is. But instead of having like a little handful of chips, where you're taking a couple of chips and you're putting some on control of scouting and some on control of churches and some on control of the media and some on control of non-government organizations and some on control of the Red Cross or like whatever it is. Imagine that you have a wall of chips behind you and a shovel, and you're just digging into the wall of chips and you're just covering the table because you've got unlimited
Mm-hmm.
funds. And most people, I used to work on Wall Street, and most people just don't understand. They're like, "Oh, you're saying that they could control the media? Oh, they've bought up all the media is in on it and everything like that." A couple $100 billion to control the media a year, or whatever that cost is. If you're stealing trillions of dollars, that couple $100 billion a year on Wall Street, that's known as mice nuts.
Yeah. Dust.
It might as well be free. Like a lot of people, they're just not good with big numbers. They
Mm.
can't comprehend it. They don't understand the size of the sums that are being stolen
Yep.
from them through the TARP and the TALF and the bailouts and the stimulus and the unnecessary defense spending or whatever. So they just can't they can't comprehend that. But it might as well be free.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, when they print the money, when they own the printing press, I mean, it's that's your first clue, right?
Right.
There's no regulation over the printing. In fact, the Fed's never been audited. Fortunately for me, I came out of my stupor. It began in around 1998, and then after 9/11, about 3 months, I really began to. Actually, just a few weeks after 9/11, a friend of mine called and said, "You need to look at Building 7." And that was really the time at which things really started to change for me. And I began to study the history of the Federal Reserve and the whole money system, the money changers with Bill Still, and just so many great documentaries began to come to light, even Zeitgeist and others around that period of time, where I had actually, my love for reading, because I attended public school, I hated reading for a whole 10 years after graduating with mediocre grades because I really wasn't interested. I basically learned to hate reading, and now that I know the reasons for that, it was because I was being assigned to read things I had absolutely no interest in. So,
By design.
yeah, exactly. And so a friend some 10 years later would get me interested in the work of C. Evans Wentz, Mount Kuchama, the Sacred Mountains, and ultimately that led to other things, my interest in figuring out what is this AIDS virus. So I read AIDS and the Doctors of Death, and other multiple years of study into different things, which eventually led to the study of comparative mythologies and religions. And I wanted to know, what is God? What is this thing behind religion? What is religion? What is Gnosticism? Why are the three major religions Gnostic? And yet all of this stuff seems to come back to one word: control. We need to invent these crises to exact control, and we're definitely going to get into that as we move ahead. But that was my next topic, was the media complex, and I think you just nailed it pretty hard. But let's maybe just unpack that just a little more, because the media complex, folks, if you don't think it's in your life, when you're in line at the grocery store next time, ask yourself, how can they still be printing the National Enquirer? I never see anybody buying that magazine, but the racks are always full. How is that possible? But yeah, maybe just unpack on the media complex. That's one thing I've worked in for 15 years as a professional sound man. I was behind the curtain. They called us the Men in Black. That and the stagehands and the lighting guys and the video guys, we all ran and produced these massive multi-million-dollar shows in St. Louis at the Edward Jones Dome, formerly the Trans World Dome. I saw how naming rights go with everything, and how basically the religious shows were some of the worst in terms of how they were behind the curtain and when they'd go out onto the stage and fleece people, for their money and all this stuff. But ultimately, I think all this stuff, the way media is the stage and the platform and the mechanism in which these control mechanisms present their plans of action and their control over the populace, that media is the final step. And of course, that term comes from Medes, which were the people that the king would send to all the small towns around the province to issue his dictates as to how much they were to pay, how much they were to adhere and listen, and what the new decrees were. So if you'd like to just unpack that a little more.
Sure. So the most powerful weapon on the planet, the most powerful weapon in the U.S. arsenal is control of perception. Can we, if you think about the human being, the human brain is a supercomputer, but it has the same problem as a supercomputer. If you put garbage in, you get garbage out. And so can the government and its accomplices in the media make you believe that you're not a free human being that just lives on this planet, but you're an American or a Canadian or a Russian, and by virtue of where you're born, well, now you owe 50% of your income in either overt taxes, covert taxes, and inflation to Washington D.C., where they're going to look after you by spending it in your best interest. And so that media system, that ability to control the information that people receive either through the mandatory government school or through this monopolized media system, is the most powerful weapon in the world. And so the way that that it's being wielded against you as a weapon, and you mentioned it, when something like 9/11 happens or the COVID happens or whatever, when you realize that, that every single channel is selling you the exact same lie, that the story doesn't make physical sense of, with 9/11, it doesn't make physical sense. It violates the laws of physics. You've got, free fall collapses. You mentioned Building 7. I used to work I mentioned I worked on Wall Street. I
Wow.
used to work in the World Trade Center complex.
Okay.
I've actually been in Building 7. And so, Building 7 collapsed completely and symmetrically into its own footprint at free fall speed while displaying all the hallmarks of controlled demolition, including free fall collapse, symmetrical collapse. Falls into its own footprint, and it leaves a pool of molten metal there that's still molten weeks later. But the television wants you to believe that it was brought down by normal fires. Well, some people, once they see that, they're like, wait a minute, I'm being lied to on every single channel.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we do in the book is, we use a lot of visualizations. And so we've got media ownership charts in the book that, that break down and expose that it's there. On the old media side, there's 6 monopoly media companies running hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of
Mm-hmm.
subsidiaries to give the population the illusion that there's all these different information sources in society, and they can't all be in on it together or whatever. But if you tried to explain that to your friends and your family, that this was going on, they may or may not believe you. But if you show them the media ownership chart that we have in the book or in our White Rose Mucho Grande posters, where we blow up the entire chart so you can see it, and download it for free and put it on the wall in your local coffee house, because your friends or your colleagues or your neighbors, because they see it with their own eyes, they're like, holy crap, there's 6 companies running hundreds and hundreds of subsidiaries to give everybody the illusion that there's all these different information sources inside, and they get it because they came to that moment of insight because they could see it with their own eyes. And so that's one of the, kind of the things that we're doing in the book. Is it's really designed to wake up your friends, your family, your neighbors, your colleagues as to what's going on. And we're using a lot of techniques that shortcut learning and bring people to that moment of insight. Another visualization from the book is, we've got a media ownership. We've got a chart showing dozens and dozens of ostensibly unaffiliated, unconnected companies media companies whose key reporters and editors and publishers are all have all been maneuvered into those positions, and they're all from either the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderberg Group. Is an older chart. You could include the World Economic Forum and some other organizations as well. But then you start realizing that, going back in time, whether it's the media or whether it's every power position, one of the other charts that we have shows that those three organizations have not just, placed their members into the media, but they've also been at every power position in the United States government and the banking system and the Federal Reserve, going back decades through both Republican and Democratic administrations, whether it's the president, the vice president, cabinet officials, the head of the CIA, the head of the FBI, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, the Bank of International Settlements, the International Monetary Fund, the Import-Export Bank, aligned with the money center banks. Okay, so it's these government officials with Brown Brothers Harriman, JP Morgan Chase, Citigroup,
Wells
Bank of
Fargo.
America, Wells Fargo. So it's the bankers getting together, all having this access to every power position in the government. And when you see that with your own eyes and you understand, oh, you can, it's like being able to see the structure of the deep state. Like I can actually show you what the deep state looks like. I can't tell you who's at the boardroom table. I've got some ideas at the couple of seats, a couple of people that are at the boardroom table. I can't tell you who's at the very, very top, because real power exercises itself from behind the scenes. Real power is not on television.
Correct.
The president's making any decision. Like, if you think the president's making his own decisions, I got news for you. No, it's a puppet show. It's a puppet show on TV. And so that's really how it's being done. Is they're controlling. They've got a network of co-conspirators that they've maneuvered over decades and decades and decades into all of the key reporterships, editorships, publisherships. And we can show you what that network looks like. You can see it with your own eyes. When you see it with your own eyes, you're like, I did not understand that this was going on. And so what we're doing is we're using visualization to make something that was invisible, now visible. And so now you can actually, that's how they've been doing it. Oh, I guess it is all the media is in on it, because they can see the connections between the players that were previously invisible.
Yeah, that's well said. Sort of a technocratic plutocracy, you could say. Yep.
And anything that rises up that begins to gather eyeballs. So any social media platform or video sharing platform, or even, I remember when they bought Groupon, for almost over $1 billion, because Groupon could had millions of emails, and they could anybody that can reach millions of people, we're going to just stack money on the table until you sell out to us. They bought YouTube for, I think it was $1.3 billion, when YouTube had less than 100 employees and a handful of servers. So that's we got, again, going back to my analogy of the roulette table and the shovel, we have unlimited chips, unlimited money. We're just going to, and the name of the game is control of perception. And so we're going to buy up anything that reaches the people. So now what you've got is half of the population that has figured out that the government and the media are lying to them, okay? And then you've got half of the population that doesn't get it at all, and you can kind of tell who's who by who's not wearing a mask.
Yeah, excellent points. I wanted to say it's a technocratic plutocracy by way of corptocracy. And
I
it's
call it I call it an oligarchical kleptocracy.
there you go. Yep.
So ruled by a small number of thieves. Okay, so it can be thought of as an oligarchical kleptocracy, and that's one of the other things that I do that other people don't. That I've seen, I did a podcast the other day, and we were talking about the fact that that one of the things I'm known for is popularizing the calling it intergenerational organized crime or calling it organized crime, and how many other people have come and have begun using those same terms and that same moniker, from Derek Bros to Whitney Webb, or and others. And so now you're seeing more and more people realize and begin calling it what it is, which we've got an organized crime government, an organized crime system. And when you call it that, that is the key that unlocks all the locks. That explains what's going on, whether what's going on in the Ukraine, or what's going on with 9/11, or what's going on with the COVID. Now you can kind of understand it from what it is. And by the way, the criminals are eugenicists at the top,
Hmm.
because the first group that hijacked the government, I believe, was the Rockefellers and the Carnegies. And because they were eugenicists, they've never lost control of that government. And so the government at the top is eugenics based. And so that explains the deaths associated with the COVID vaccine. That explains the COVID. That explains the aluminum and aluminum hydroxide, aluminum phosphate, and
Hmm.
mercury in
Yep.
vaccines. Explains AIDS. It explains constant, never-ending warfare
Hmm.
where they're killing off the strong males.
Right.
So they're getting all the strong males that would oppose them in each of the different countries, because it's different countries running the same technique
Hmm.
on their populations. And then we menace the Russians, who cower to their government for security. The Russians menace their population with the Americans, so that the Russians cower, to their government for security.
Really is a psychological Ouroboros.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is. It is. It
You
is.
can now see how for thousands of years these family bloodlines, if you're a Fritz Springmeier fan of the 13 satanic bloodlines or whatnot, have kept their power over all these generations. So fascinating stuff. We're close to the halfway point, and I just really we'll take a short break with a video run here in just a couple of minutes. But prior to getting to that, religion and governments. I know we have this idea of separation, church and state, and we'll get into that more on the other side. But it was an interesting thing to see all these so-called awoken conservatives falling out of the tree of common sense, if you will, once the Palestine and Israeli conflict kicked off. You had a lot of really influential voices in and what do they call them? Trendsetters in social media. The Charlie Kirks, Pasobics, and multiple others who basically, because of their religious connotations, lost all sense of their own humanity and immediately have to go into this polarized condition. And I know a lot of the people that follow my work are not pleased by this because it's sort of, you want to stay neutral, you want to stay centered and not be pushed and judged for not being in a polarized position. So regarding religion and governments, religion is very good at this polarization. It's one of the oldest polarizations. As we know, this conflict is ancient, many people say. So I guess my question to you is, inside religion and these governments and these institutions, we have intellectuals and we have some incredible human achievement. Why does it go wrong?
Uh, because human beings are involved, and human beings are fallible, and they have, they've got, base desires and base consciousness. And a lot of people, are willing to sell out their fellow man for rapidly depreciating fiat paper tickets. And so it really is a poverty.
Hmm.
But the churches are just as easily hijacked. And if you take a look, first of all, I'll say, there's a lot of the religions, and I'll just pick on Catholicism as like one example, are essentially running the exact same playbook as the government system. They're going to take your kids, they're going to put them into the church school, and they're going to raise them in the ideology of the church to be able to produce a tither, the same way that the government forces you into their mandatory government school so that they can raise up a taxpayer. A lot of these churches are using kind of like the exact same techniques. One of my marks of a good church is it's got an agape box in the back. They're not going to try and publicly shame the congregation into donating by passing the hat publicly. And a lot of these churches are running the exact same bag of tricks, and they're going along with the government, like foot, hook, line, and sinker. They've got a Cub Scout or a Boy Scout troop associated with the church. And then the final thing is that the government, has essentially stifled the good churches. So, because there's lots of good churches, lots of good pastors that are trying to, really, help their congregations and have the best of intentions at heart. But they can't talk about politics from the pulpit, or they lose their tax exempt status. So the government has been able to simultaneously co-opt some churches. The Rockefellers, famously, funded the Council of Churches, and so that there's hierarchical organizations where accessories to the crime can be identified and developed and promoted and financed, and those become kind of like the public faces of religion, whether we want them to be the public face of religion or not. But at the same time that they've been co-opted, the good ones are being silenced through this government system that can revoke their tax exempt status at any time.
Excellent. Well said. All right. Well, we'll take a short break. I'm going to run an actual song that I wrote the lyrics for in 2004 and recorded in 2005. This is called The Cure. So we'll be back in just a little over 3 minutes. If you want to take a quick break, grab a coffee or something, and I'll see you right on the other side.
You got it.
Okay.
Question. Do you have an answer? I hear a lot about progress towards disaster. Well, look at where we're going. Understand where we come from. Who the fuck is driving this motherfucking boat that we're on? I don't like where we're going. I don't like what they're saying. All this fear and propaganda. They try to put us in a box. I had to break my way out. Now I'm gonna speak out. And what I'm about to tell will put you in a state of shock. All aboard. This train is leaving, so you're not so sure know what to believe in. Walk now the door. The end of all deceiving and the war. Cause I'm bringing you the cure down. All aboard. This train is leaving, so you're not so sure know what to believe in. Walk now the door. The end to all deceiving and the war. Cause I'm bringing you the cure down. Look up, question this bullshit. Look at what these boys did. A big ass lie. Now everyone believes from the trauma. Fuck all the drama. 9/11 was an inside job. Just ask Osama. Oh, where did Osama go? To the Azores. We paid him off with virtues and gold. It was an inside job. Look how they shove and push. The New World Order. Police state. Fuck you, George Bush. Clinton set the stage. Oklahoma City was a terrorism's now the new enemy. This they sold it on TV. They told us all what to believe. They blamed it on the right wing. Oh, say, can you see? The Harvey McVeigh, Osama bin Laden, yeah, right. An enemy perceived gives them reason to proceed. With the policies agreed, used to feed the war machine. 9/11 was a military coup used to overthrow the Constitution with problem reaction solution. Psychological pollution, Dick Cheney's revolution. The New World Order's as old as prostitution. 4 planes hijacked by terrorists with box cutters. This conspiracy theory will never hold water. The official story's full of holes and bullshit. You can fly a Boeing 747 right through it. If you don't believe me, look at history. All these fucking wolves walk around dressed like sheep. They even preach your lies from the pulpit and the steeples. Has there ever been a government that didn't turn on its people? If you don't believe me, look at history. All these fucking wolves walk around dressed like sheep. They even preach your lies from the pulpit and the steeples. Has there ever been a government that didn't turn on its people? do I say this, feel this, and do what I do? Cause I don't have the heart to let our children go through total surveillance in a microchip population. Feeling more and more G like an alien nation. When liberty is traded for security throughout history, you get tyranny. But what makes us so different from then to now? The TV's got millions of you motherfuckers dumbed down. I was there at one time, I said nuke 'em all. Turn the Middle East into a shopping mall, into a parking lot or a reflective pool. When I woke up, I realized I was a goddamn fool. We was con, tricked, lied to, misled, deceived. The founding fathers warned us there'd be men like these. Satanic, fanatic, neocon again. If you ain't with the truth, then I guess you with them. Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories. Like 19 hijackers could turn our pilots into pussies. Osama, Oswald, McVeigh always blame the That shit might work on a sheet, but it don't work on me. All aboard. This train is leaving, so you're not so sure. Don't know what to believe in now. The end to all deceiving how. Cause I'm bringing you the truth down. All aboard. This train is leaving, so you're not so sure. Don't know what to believe in now. The end to all deceiving how. Cause I'm bringing you the cure down. If you don't believe me, look at history.
All these wolves walking around dressed like sheep.
If you don't believe me, look at history.
They even preach your lies from the pulpit and the steeples.
If you don't believe me, look at history.
Has there ever been a government that didn't turn on its people?
If you don't believe me, look at history.
Has there ever been a government that didn't turn on its people?
All right, and welcome back. Etienne. So from here, I want to move to some discussion of the government. And that song, if anyone's just joining, is The Cure. It's called The Cure, and I wrote that and recorded it in 2004 and 5. The lyrics and the
Matt,
music.
that was really, really good.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was really good, man. I was impressed by that. That's going. I do a weekly newsletter called 5 Meme Friday, and every week we highlight and feature some truth music, and that's going in next week's issue.
Oh, well, that's great.
Faux show, man. I was really impressed by that. Wow.
Thanks, buddy.
Good job.
Yeah, it's long time ago for me, but I've got several songs that I was inspired because it was such a lonely time, the early 2000s, and either people were into the 2012's coming and we're all going to be saved, we don't have to worry about nothing, or or people were just pro Bush or pro against Bush. But I sort of began to understand that how the both party system was behind this, the uniparty, call it what it is, right?
Yeah.
But that's kind of where I wanted to lead this conversation. But yeah, I appreciate that. I'm actually got to upload that song to my YouTube, so I'll shoot over a link once that's uploaded. I just got that video finished this morning. I've got about 87 songs up on YouTube, so I'll send you the direct link to that, and this show should be up later today as well.
Excellent.
Music was a big part for me. It helped me to psychologically deal with this very feeling of being so alone and such a, there just weren't a lot of people that, were awake, if you really will, to use that term. There's so many things that we could discuss, but I really want to get to this idea of the whole of the 1871 U.S. incorporation, when the U.S. was incorporated, and just get your opinion as we go down the list of topics. What, in your feeling, in your research, was the major change that occurred? I know a lot of people say we used to be citizens of states, of free states, prior to 1871. And then when the U.S. became incorporated, we became citizens of the federal system or maritime law or this, whole corporatization model. So you just want to speak to that a little bit. And I guess as to natural rights, citizenship, and the federal takeover, and how things really changed pre-1871 and then post-1871.
Sure. And I think the starting point of that, we've got to actually kind of take it back to the legitimacy of government as itself. And so, like, I'm a voluntarist, and I don't believe that government of any type, way, shape, or form is legitimate for a variety of reasons. Number one, it's impossible to delegate a right that you do not possess yourself to a representative or to a government. So if you don't have the ability to make up rules for your neighbor, if you don't have the ability to steal your neighbor's money and redistribute it yourself, then you cannot delegate a right that you do not have yourself to a representative or to a government. You can't be bound by a social contract that you didn't sign. And if my girlfriend and myself can't vote to rob Matt because there's two of us and one of him, well, it doesn't matter if there's three of us or five of us or 330 million of us. There's no magical additional person that makes something that's inherently immoral and illogical moral and logical. So government has been the biggest scam in all of history. It is the biggest scam at all. And the only reason that most people believe that it's legitimate, desirable, and necessary is they were indoctrinated into the belief system when they were children in a system that was running unethically manipulative techniques on them, product placing the flag, controlling the information they receive in the mandatory government school, Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts, explorers, etc. And so, but if you step back as an adult, okay, and go, hey, wait a minute, I've never really thought about that. Is government legitimate at all? And you really unpack it, you're going to find that the legitimacy disappears like the dew in the morning sun. And so there is no way to have a legitimate government. And so the mythology that we're presented in the government school system is that you got to. So Matt, the reason that you have to pay half your income to Washington D.C. in overt taxes, covert taxes, inflation. See, the reason is that hundreds and hundreds of years ago, okay, 4 or 5 dozen slave owners on a continent of 3 million people, attorneys, politicians, and slave owners, go into a room and they write down on a fancy piece of paper that they alone get to make up rules and steal the wealth of others. And then their newspapers proclaimed that valid, okay? And that's why you owe 50% of your income to Washington, D.C. Now, as an adult, when you go, hey, wait a minute, could I do that myself? Could I get together with 5 or 6 dozen of my friends and we just write down on a piece of paper that we run and control everything? And then maybe we have some, maybe we're wealthy. And so we have some elections and we can trick people into participating in the election. Okay. And then we have the newspapers say, oh, we had an election and these are the people that get to rob and control you. Like it doesn't even make any sense. So I wanted to kind of just take it back to the basics of you can't have a legitimate government. Now, so a government was imposed upon the population of the United States that was definitely better than the openly organized crime government that we have right now, but not really that much better if you really think about it. And I'll just give you kind of like one example. And so, like supposedly we have a Bill of Rights, but that Bill of Rights was thrown out the window 5 minutes after the government was put into place. And so literally right after the government kind of came online, okay, George Washington and Alexander Hamilton marched an army of 13,000 people into Pennsylvania to put down the Presti rebellion. Okay, they searched homes without warrants. They rustled people, out of their homes in the middle of the night into the snow. They made people sign loyalty oaths to the new government. Okay. And so were they really, and they were enforcing a tax that benefited large distillers like Washington at the expense of smaller distillers. Okay. And so are we what we're told about the quote unquote founding of the country, is that true? Or maybe is that, the same way once the Nazis came to power, they rewrote the history of Germany and began controlling the information that the students in Nazi Germany, received, the same way when the Bolsheviks came to power. They began rewriting the history of Russia and began teaching in their mandatory government schools the mythology of the Bolshevik Revolution. And so I think everybody needs to realize that maybe some of the things that we were told by the government teacher teaching out of the government textbook in the mandatory government school wasn't really, doesn't really kind of make a lot of sense now. But let's say that it was like a little bit better than what we have now. And so how did we get here from where we were to where we are now? Yes, I agree with you that the government was incorporated. It became a corporation. It began imposing admiralty law on the population versus the law of the land. It began imposing the law of the sea. And then a lot of what the government does under what I would call the color of law is through this corporate system. And so I'm 100% for pulling yourself out of the corporate system, correcting your stats and standing. This weekend, we're having an event in Sedona, Arizona called Liberty on the Rocks, Sedona, where we're going to have experts in status and standing and allodial title and how to protect yourself with trusts and other reasons to show you how to fix the system, and that'll be available for live stream. So even if you missed joining us in Sedona, you can get the live stream to get this information, but we'll show you how to get yourself out of that government system. Now, because it's an organized crime system, there's no guarantee that your local municipality is going to do the right thing and honor the terms of their own game. So even if you beat them using their own game, because it's organized crime at the top and because the people that are kind of in on it at the police and the magistrate and the county clerk level, it's hard to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it. I don't want to say that these are all foolproof methods because we're dealing with organized crime at the top. But, we're going to be showing people how to beat the government at its own game in Sedona this weekend. And so I'm all for that. But at the end of the day, I don't believe in the legitimacy of kind of any government. And so that's just kind of my position.
I understand totally. Basically, what I was leading to with the question was I was going to step us back to this idea of the Articles of Confederation versus the Constitution and the Declaration. And basically, from a psychological angle, I have been thinking about this for quite a long time. Why did we have to form a government at all in the United States? I mean, it could have been left to the local level or each independent colony. But the problem was that we established, at least from my opinion, a parliamentarian system based on the country that we came from, that we were used to that kind of a system. So, of course, the farm owners, the elite of that period of time would have been prone to establish what they were familiar with, which was going to lead me to another question, basically, why does men establish a government at all? And what is the psychological angle on that you see as a reason for why man seems to have this need for a government, whether it's a government in India or whether it's a government in the UK or Japan? There's always this, is it natural based and we just get it wrong? Where does the psychological need come for this kind of an idea of government? And it could be any control system over anybody else. Worldwide.
So, like, first of all, let's talk about the people that are imposing government on us, and then let's separate it between the people that are imposing government on us and the people that go along with it. And so, first, we'll discuss, going back to the Articles of Confederation, we'll discuss the people that oppose it on us. And so, I'm just going to read to you a little bit from Government: The Biggest Scam in History, and this is from a one-pager in the book called The Shady History of the Constitution that you can actually read for free at artofliberty.substack.com. And so a lot of what we call one-pagers in the book we've syndicated as articles on our Substack at artofliberty.substack.com. But this one is called The Shady History of the Constitution, and this is a sub part called The History and Facts the Government School Leaves Out. The delegates assembled in Philadelphia in May 1787 for the purpose of amending, not replacing, the Articles of Confederation were very different from the revolutionaries that signed the Declaration of Independence in 1776. The famous revolutionaries were not present. Jefferson and Adams were in Europe. Thomas Paine, Sam Adams, and Chris Gadsden were not chosen. And Patrick Henry refused to participate outright, claiming he smelt a rat. Out of the 74 delegates chosen, 19 refused or didn't attend. Out of the 55 delegates who showed up, 41 were politicians, 34 were lawyers, 11 were admitted Freemasons, with two additional that would join lodges after the convention, with over a dozen more suspected of being Freemasons. According to Maryland delegate James McHenry, at least 21 of the 55 delegates favored some form of monarchy. The convention operated under great secrecy. Held in the summer months with all the windows nailed shut, sentries posted at the door, and all the participants sworn to secrecy. The proceedings wouldn't be published for 32 years later. Madison's edited notes 53 years later. It is unlikely that the states would have sent delegates at all if they had known of the conspirators' plans to abolish the articles and replace them with a federal government, and many delegates openly protested. William Patterson echoed many, quote, "We ought to keep within its limits or be charged by our constituents with usurpation. We have no power to go beyond the Confederation. If the Confederacy is wrong, then let us return to our states and obtain larger powers, not assume them ourselves." Of the 74 delegates appointed, 19 refused outright or didn't attend, 14 left early, some in open disgust. Of the 41 who stayed through September, 3 refused to sign, leaving 38 out of 74, 53%, hardly a plurality. And they signed not as delegates, but they signed, quote, "in witness whereof." So I just saw this going, but I have no authority to do what I'm doing. So I'm just going to sign as in witness whereof. Of the 38 who gave themselves the power to make up rules for everyone and take the wealth of others, 80% would personally enrich themselves by holding some office under the Constitution, including 2 presidents, 1 vice president, 5 justices, 11 senators, and 8 representatives. Now, control of perception, evident then as evident today. Similar to organized crime's control of the media today, the Wall Street crowd were controlling the information perception during the ratification debates. According to Van Doren's The Great Rehearsal, anti-federalist speeches were never printed because the convention's transcriber, Thomas Lloyd, quote, "appears to have been bought off by the Federalists and published only speeches by Federalists Wilson and McKean," unquote. Serious allegations were made in New York and elsewhere of Federalist mail tampering. So they were throwing anti-Federalist tracts away, control of perception. The Pennsylvania Herald, the only paper reporting on the ratification debates, was bought off as described. And I'm going to read a quote by one of the leading anti-Federalists, Sentinel, published in Sentinel 7. And he said, quote, and so these are the contemporaries. So the contemporaries of the folks that brought you the Constitution are saying, hey, they're criminals. This is a conspiracy. They're not telling you the whole truth. They're censoring the mail. They're controlling the press. And so anyway, here's an exact quote. Quote, "The authors and abettors of the new Constitution shudder at the term conspirators being applied to them, as it designates their true character. Attempts to prevent discussion by shackling the press ought to be a signal of alarm to free men and considered an annunciation of mediated tyranny. When every means failed to shackle the press, the free and independent papers were attempted to be demolished by withdrawing all the subscriptions to them within the sphere of the influence of the conspirators. The Pennsylvania Herald has been silenced. The editor is dismissed, and the debates of the convention thereby suppressed." Sentinel 12, January 23rd, 1788.
There's the media again.
There's the media. So it's been the government and the media and academia going back to the quote unquote founding of the country. They've been controlling the information that the population receives about the ratification of the Constitution, about what really happened on 9/11, about the COVID,
Yep.
about the Gulf of Tonkin, about
The wars. Yeah.
tossed out of incubators, about a great many things. And then when you realize that that's going on, then that's like the glitch in the matrix that lets you go, oh, okay, all the media is in on it. They've bought up the whole media, and now you begin to make sense of what's going on. And so it's been going on a very, very long time.
Interesting. That brings up actually in my next question, the Constitution, Bill of Rights, Declaration of Independence, was resistance futile? Was my note to myself, and what I had coming to me in my mind, and I've thought about this for a long time, and it's sort of why I still give myself this term of patriot for one reason only. I love my country. In other words, my place that I live, and sort of the ideals, you could say, the ideals behind its founding. And what's interesting to me, and the reason why, is because on a base level, it's the first time that man in his wisdom had ever declared to the rulers of the planet, being the monarchies and the papacy, that he was no longer subject to their control or rule. Now, it's not to say they didn't have nefarious, as George Washington, they led the whiskey tax and such like that these things weren't, bound to happen. But it was, again, and if you study the work of, say, a Gary Wayne, he's shown that the Pope actually declared the Declaration of Independence to be a satanic document, and more or less ordered his Jesuit armies to declare eternal war against the United States until they brought it to its knees. And then you can look at the 200-year plan in Freemasonry, which was established by the Blue Lodge, basically, that it would eventually infiltrate all the institutions within the United States and take it over because of its insubordination to the crown and the papacy, which led to, we did fight a very real war here, the Revolutionary War. So there is that history there. And that brings us to the Civil War, which, again, I think this might be Gary Wayne, I can't remember for sure, but the Masonic Rebellion on the 33rd parallel at Charleston, South Carolina, where the first shot of the Civil War was fired in front of a Masonic lodge over an argument between Masons of the North and those of the South, the North wanting to join the Mother Lodge in England and give her full control as the World Lodge in control of all other lodges. And then those in the Southern states who said, this is the same thing that we fought the Revolutionary War against, we're not going to do it. And so the whole thing was not over slavery at all. It was over the control of the Masonic Lodge by Britain over the United States as a worldwide authority in Masonry. Have you looked into that at all? And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, we cover Masonry in the book. There's Mark Passio and I wrote an open letter to Freemasonry where we recognize that, that there are a lot of good Masons, but that the lodge system itself has been hijacked by organized crime interests that are running, that are, kind of using this international network, people that are, sworn to secrecy, evaluated by degree, able to, influence, politics in their own, city. And so, especially in a lot of, like kind of small town America, it's the Masons that are kind of operating together to get their members elected as the mayor and the city council and the police chief and the sheriff. And so we encourage them in the article, which you can also find at artofliberty.substack.com, as well as an interview with Mark Passio and myself kind of discussing it. We recognize that there's good Masons, and we're encouraging them to clean out the lodge. They need the good Masons, the same way the good cops need to arrest the bad cops. The good Masons need to stand up and say, hey, this is not what Masonry is all about. There's people that are abusing the lodge system for their own personal enrichment and aggrandizement, and that's got to stop. And so I think the lodge system has been hijacked, and I think it's used because especially like going back to the kind of the early days, back during the quote unquote founding of the country. There was really no other organization besides really the Catholic Church, that had a network, a global international network that they could exercise power through, in that way. So of course it got hijacked. And really that's the nature of the organized crime system that we live under today. We're going to penetrate and hijack through blackmail, bribery, assassination, anything that's able to reach people. We're going to take it over and we're going to twist it into our own ends because we have this unlimited capital, and we've got people that we've raised up in our mandatory government schools and scouting programs that will murder whoever they're told, completely amoral, raised to be amoral, for the purpose of keeping the system in power. And so, that is, that's a very, very powerful weapon to wield, that's been wielded for centuries.
How would you look at like a BLM and Antifa and these calls by, the Soros-funded NGOs and such who manifest these slogans of defund the police and such? How would you look at that in terms of, comparing that to or contrasting that with this idea that scouts are raised and, school-age children are raised to be servants of the state, where we almost seem to have this counterbalance or counteractive force that's trying to completely disintegrate through this defund the police kind of mantras and slogans that ultimately are communistic?
So it's controlled opposition. So, Stalin said the best way to control the opposition is to lead it ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so that controlled opposition capability, with BLM, I think is being used for divide and conquer. And so if you go back to the founding of BLM, what was going on is that the people in the United States were realizing that, hey, the police are out of control. The police have been militarized against us. The police are raising revenue on their neighbors and on the population through exorbitant fines and victimless crimes. And the police are doing, bad things. They're using violence on peaceful people, okay, for politicians or to raise revenue on their neighbors. And so, and the police, because they had been left unchecked and because they have a monopoly on violence, you could still have armed protective services without monopoly police, where you'd be able to fire the company if they got out of control and everybody just goes to another company that's not doing the egregious things that the monopoly police are doing. Okay, but that's not in the government's interest. They need shave-headed gunmen to implement the system on everybody else. And so what I believe BLM was, oh, we're not going to make it that the police are aggressing on the whole population, because the police don't care if you're white or black at all, man. They're going to beat you up. They beat up a friend of mine here in Sedona, and a police officer broke her leg in a traffic stop over an expired registration tag. She's white as the living snow. Like, it's not a black-white issue, but we're going to divide and conquer the population. We're going to make it a black-white issue. We're going to say, hey, only, it's just being done to black people. It's not being done to white. Yeah, it is being done to white people, and it's being done to people of Hispanic origin, and it's being done to people of Orientals, and it's being done to everybody. And so I think BLM, was taking the focus off of the police are aggressing on everybody's rights and trying to make it look like it was only black folks, and it was the divide and conquer of making black versus white. And so that divide and conquer, Washington, D.C. is constantly constantly using divide and conquer so that the people are fighting and bickering with themselves instead of being focused on, they've got people focused on the cape instead of being focused on the matador. And I'm trying to get people pointed in the right direction and focused on the matador.
Mm-hmm. And I think, too, that one of the mistakes we make is, we leave out psychology. So it's very important that, not all of these issues that you look at are necessarily 100% black or white, but they're presented as such in the media for a certain goal, certain outcome. And when you look at these issues, make sure you look at it from a psychological standpoint, because it's the direction of, controlling perception is really what this all comes down to. And if you're going to have a healthy mind and a healthy constitution of your own, which is a part of every character, if it's the character of a nation or the character of a man, a good study and background in psychology will definitely help you out. What you said earlier about the media, after 9/11, one of the things I noticed extremely, hugely so, was that the media began to produce all these documentaries about FBI and CIA and the hero ship, especially during the Bush years, which were basically 8 long, dark years of my life, because it was very lonely to be in a rural area with so many Bush supporters. And of course, being a firefighter, I've dealt with a lot of police and sheriff's deputies. And I would say, like anything, the majority of people, at least from my own experience, are good-hearted people. They mean to do well. But I think where we have to be very discerning is in this polarized presentation. You said it very well, because at a point from 2008 upward, and until around 2014, when we began to see the BLMs come out of the woodwork, there was an extreme militarization of the police, even under Obama's watch. And all of a sudden, this fits very well with what you're saying. The psychology behind it was, we've got to get this notion that the police are now the bad guys so that we can create an even further divide. And it seems like, whatever you think of Trump, folks, it doesn't matter. But the interesting part of him, I would say, is that I've never seen the media react in such a way. And it really served in a lot of ways to wake a lot of people up, whether he was a good guy or bad. Because I know that a lot of people began to question the media, which was something I wrote about in song after song. And it was so refreshing to see people actually questioning the media. But you're still, you got to know that you have to step away and see this divide. I know you've got to wrap it up. I'm going to keep us to the 2-hour limit too. I want to try to pound through a few more questions if possible. And has anybody ever told you that you actually look like Etienne de la Boetie?
No, but in some ways I feel like I am him reincarnated, and I'm definitely doing his work in the modern age. And so for those that aren't familiar with the original Etienne de la Boetie, he was essentially the first that exposed the tricks and the techniques that rulers used, not just to get, obedience, but to get fealty and adoration. He was a little bit like Machiavelli. And so Machiavelli was, when he wrote The Prince, he was like, hire me and I'll show you these psychological tricks to, run your tax slaves. And Boetie was a little bit different. He's like, these guys are jerks. They're running game on you. Look what they're doing. And so I'm doing his work in the modern age, which is one of the reasons I have the two, so people don't, confuse me with the original, and also so you can find my work in search engines versus the original. But I definitely believe I'm doing his work in the modern age.
That's really cool. They say some people do believe in reincarnation, but I'd say you're pretty close for a second. And he, of course, wrote Discourse of Voluntary Servitude in the 16th century, an incredible thinker. Here's a quote just to give you guys a little bit of his work as a background. He said, "Liberty is the natural condition of the people. Servitude, however, is fostered when people are raised in subjection. People are trained to adore rulers. While freedom is forgotten by many, there are always some who will never submit." So that might explain in a lot of ways why the founding fathers and such were into the parliamentarian system, because many of them, having come from monarchical rule in Great Britain and elsewhere in Europe, which was the standard and still is in many cases, that's something that's hard to shed. So I wanted to talk a little bit about voluntaryism, and how do you think that will help for people to shed this idea that they need government, and especially for people in Europe, that they need a monarchy or that they need anything above them? In other words, no masters above, no slaves below. How can understanding something like discourse of voluntary servitude and these ideals of voluntarism help people to free their minds from the need for such a system in the first place?
I think the main thing is really to realize that the government is running this kind of pimp game on you. And I actually have an article at artofliberty.substack.com that breaks down the pimp game. It's literally, in many ways, the same techniques that pimps use on their tax slaves the government is using on ours, creating dependency. And you can go take a look at that article. But like, once you realize, like, nobody, what I've discovered, and one of the things that we're doing differently at the Art of Liberty Foundation than many other kind of liberty organizations are doing, is we're exposing these unethically manipulative techniques so that people understand that they're getting chumped. And nobody likes to get chumped, right? I mean, like, nobody. So once people realize, hey, they're running game on me, they're running a playbook on me. Well, once that people realize that, they're like, I'm out. And so we call that the one-way revolution. It's not, I'm going to vote for Trump this year and I'm going to vote for Biden next year, and I voted for Obama, but this year I'm going to vote for Trump, and next year I'm going to vote for, somebody else. Once you realize that the whole thing is illegitimate, you're free. You're
Sort of
mentally
exiting the game.
free. Yeah, you're out of the game. You're out of their game. You're no longer going to, you're no longer forced to, or believe that you're forced to participate in the rigged poker game of elections. That you understand how the system works, and then that mental freedom, that's half the battle right there.
Yeah, excellent. So, solutions in education. What do you think are some current best practices in creating self-awareness and responsibility in youth? Talk about homeschooling briefly. I mean, just real quick, what do you think would benefit listeners to look into as options for education? Because that's really a big part.
Yeah, I have a whole bunch of solutions in the back of Government, the biggest scam in history exposed. But some, on the education side, it's get your kids out of the indoctrination system. I would rather my kids be uneducated than be educated by the state. And so you don't want the government injecting your kids with stuff, getting your kids on Ritalin, pushing transgenderism on your kids. Like, whatever it takes, if you have to do co-ops, if you have to do self-directed learning, if they just have to sit home and read books by themselves because that's all that you can afford, it is way better than going into these indoctrination centers where the teachers unwillingly, most of the teachers, they've got no idea. They've just gone to the teacher schools and these are the best practices, and they were taught it's the best practices, and they hijacked the teachers college at Columbia years ago, and so they're having the teachers don't understand. I think a lot of them do. I think a lot of them are willfully ignorant, but you got to get your kids out of these government indoctrination centers.
Excellent. Well, Etienne, I want to thank you for your time. I know we're a little pressed. You've got a great event coming up again. I'd like to share that just for the listeners here. Guys, check out the artofliberty.org website. You can get all his links to the social, to the Substack. Everything is there. And just want to say thanks. And why don't you give the listening audience any contact information and where to get your book as well?
Sure. The book is available exclusively at government-scam.com. The Art of Liberty Foundation is at artofliberty.org. And like I said, you can find a lot of the content from the book at artofliberty.substack.com. And even if you've read the book, what we've done, because we have more room to work with at artofliberty.substack.com, is we value added it with additional information and really expanded it. We're able to include videos and things like that. And so just checking out artofliberty.substack.com will familiarize yourself with my work for free. The other thing that we do is we back up everything on the book with this flash drive full of documentaries and short videos and important books on PDF. Everything that's being censored on the internet, shadow banned, de-indexed, etc., we're making sure that it doesn't go away. And then it also has hundreds of prepping and survivalism resources, so you've always got it in your wallet. You can be over at a friend's house. We give you the ability to copy it. It has the PDF version of the book. Once you have a Liberator, you can make as many copies for your friends and relatives. So we're making it easy to resist this organized crime system. We're decentralizing it. We're letting people that want to say no, that want to take a stand against it. We're giving you the tools to fight back, and we're decentralizing that resistance around the world. And so that's also government-scam.com/liberator. And at that page, you can see everything that's on the Liberator. You can download it for free. It's in Dropboxes on at government-scam.com/liberator. And so you can get all the evidence of government illegitimacy and criminality. We're making it censorship proof. We're making it easily distributable. So that's part of what we do as well.
Well, great work. I got to say the book is, they say 9/10 of any sale is presentation, and it's wonderfully presented, well laid out, and it's probably very easily compatible with a younger age as well. You got somebody there to read it with them. The younger teen generations and such will be able to understand this. And from a homeschooling perspective, I think it's very important to have this book on the shelf as a teaching guide and tool. So again, I want to say thanks for your agreeing to come on the program. I hope your Liberty on the Rocks event is extremely successful. And if anyone wants to get a hold of you, what would be the best way to go about doing that?
The contact page on either artofliberty.org or government-scam.com. I'm Etienne at artofliberty.org is my email.
All right. Well, thanks again, Etienne. And to the audience, I'm going to run a video for the Out Here. If you can't hang around to talk on the other side, I totally understand. Wish you all the luck on your event. This video was produced yesterday, and it is called It Starts With You. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see you again in a very near future. I dedicate every day of my life to seeing the global controllers and their minions suffer defeat. Warmongers, energy barons, central bankers, mass mind controllers, and their ilk must be defeated ideologically. We must reach the point where no one is left who dare even listen to them, when their orders can no longer be carried out because it has become far too unpopular to follow them. This involves the skill of insight, or in other words, being able to see further down the road. Humanity has to learn to counter their narratives, lest we do the work for them of destroying ourselves and handing them this precious world unopposed, to remake in their sick, twisted, and perverted way. To do so, we must create ideas greater than their ideas. The world of mind creates the physical world, which itself is made from idea. God's one idea is nature, the universe. Man's ideas are all things man-made. This includes his wars, his religions, his philosophies, his sciences, and his evils. He whose ideas are aligned with nature holds balance as his standard. He whose ideas do not, destruction. We freely choose whose ideals we align with, and so becomes our reality. I know to whom my ideals align. Do you? You are also an idea. That is to say, you make or break yourself, and you become what you think of your own self. Together, we think civilization into or out of existence with each thought and choice we make. Culture also waxes or wanes according to our very thinking. If we are to uplift the world culture, we must uplift ourselves first as individuals, which then uplifts the world collectively, beginning in your own home. When the multitudes achieve balance within, the world of man will achieve balance without. That is the order in which we succeed. No army, crowd, or mob will ever achieve balance, only destruction. I will never give up on my own dream that within my lifetime I will see defeat come to these destroyers of civilization, these wretched, twisted miscreants of perdition, to whom so many have given authority to commit atrocities. That through the causes that I and others have taken upon ourselves to do good and right works unto our fellow man, we will know before we die that we change the world for future generations of children, both born and unborn, to inherit from our blood, sweat, and tears a better world. So many of us want to give and leave future humanity a decent world, an ideal world where love is the highest standard, one worthy of living in. The real world work that each of us performs daily determines if that world is to be or not to be. It's up to you to decide what to do with this moment and every moment to come. Make it worth it, so that when your time does come, you will know you did your best to leave this world a better place.